Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're talking optimizing Octopus with ClearMeasure. So let's jump in. We're going to start with some housekeeping. You won't have to record today's session. We will email you. It will likely be next week, but we will email you within one calendar week. Questions, we do have 10 minutes at the end of today's session where we will be doing questions for myself and Chris. We'll be talking all things Octopus. So you will have 10 minutes there at the end of today's session to ask your questions. If you can, please use Zoom Q&A. We do get some people using Zoom messaging. That isn't the best way to ask questions. They do sometimes get lost. So if you can, please use Zoom Q&A. If you're on YouTube, we will try to get to the questions, but we also have an Octopus community Slack you can join on octopus.com/Slack. If you put your questions into the webinar channel, we will definitely get to them. Okay, so today I'm joined by Chris Thomas. Hey Chris, how are you today?
Hi Derek, I'm doing well today. I've had a great time, and how are you doing today?
Fantastic as always. So you work for ClearMeasure. Tell me a little bit about what you do and what ClearMeasure do.
Yeah, so ClearMeasure, we're a software architecture company, and what we do is we empower our clients' development teams. We try and really strive for them to be self-sufficient, so we teach them and give them the tools they need to be successful, not only in their current project, but any future projects that they take on or that the company takes on, so that way they don't necessarily have to have us handhold them, but they can really do it on their own. We strive for getting their companies and clients moving fast, increasing their quality, and we want them to run their systems with confidence, knowing that's when they click the deploy button or when it's running production, it's just going to work, and they have no question about it.
Excellent. So really, as well as that, obviously you're using Octopus to help these people out.
Octopus is, I believe, I'm an advocate for Octopus. No one does it better than Octopus. Just the way they handle a lot of the variables, you can scope things, and they just do a lot of things top notch.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the thing, though, is it does so much and it does it so well. And this is one of the reasons for today's webinar. We're going to talk about some common misconfigurations that we see. It's funny because obviously when we got together to talk about some of the questions and what we're going to present on it, our experiences were very, very similar. You've got the same problems. Slow Octopus, too many environments.
Yes.
And a few others. I don't want to go into too much in spoiler fun just yet. But yeah, so that's the thing is there does seem to be a common pattern that we do see. And with that, you normally find that sometimes there's a bit of a slow Octopus, and it's generally because some bad management with environments, and then also some project stuff as well.
Right. This sort of stem from a common issue is just like a mindset, not really using the tool or maintaining the tool in a way, because what we know about all these things is entropy will make sure that if we don't maintain it, it'll degrade itself over time. So just like production, we have to maintain.
Yeah.
In production, we have to maintain our tools that we use as well.
Well, that's it. It's really just technical debt. You do need to constantly be addressing that, and I think that's some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And I'm actually going to be talking initially about how to fix a slow Octopus, which is funny because I spend a lot of time with customers, or I have until a recent role change, and it is something I see. What you'll find is you'll generally start with let's start with my most recent webinar. So I'll start with the Team City one, and then what you do find is you come in, and thankfully Chris has created a bad space. And this is what you do see. So you come in, there'll be lots of projects. Obviously, we've normally got releases, but we put this through, and then the UI sometimes starts to slow down, right? And what I find is it's never in the first 6, 12, 18 months. It's normally something that's just been grinding and slowly but surely over time. And by that they're about 2.5 years in, and they're like, why is Octopus running so slowly? And what I find is it's generally the database. What I've normally working, and slowly but surely over time. And by that they're about 2.5 years in, and they're like, why is Octopus running so slowly? And what I find is it's generally the database. What I normally find is someone has came in and just installed Octopus, because that's the thing that I find. And I've bought Octopus quite a lot in the past. You do go from proof of concept to production very easily. Is that a common thing that you see?
Yeah. Octopus is so user friendly to get set up and go. It's you can run an exe on a Windows box, and it's there. It installs the database and it installs the web UI, and it gets everything set up. It's just so easy to like get started with. And so when that happens, it turns into like you don't really think about what's going on. That Octopus is database backed, and so when we install it, we don't recognize what that means, that it's a database, just like a database in production that needs things maintained. Octopus is a database that needs things maintained.
And that's it. And to be honest, I generally find that Octopus are generally fairly hygienic animals. And to be honest, for the most part, so is the product. But there are a few things. It's a bit like, for those who aren't DBAs, quite often, old school, when you used to had to go in and actually partition and scan your disks, your hard drive disk back in the day, and Windows XP, etc. Your database is a bit like that. It will continue running, but what will happen is it'll get more and more expensive to make those calls. So in this instance, I'm going to just show you how to configure a basic SQL maintenance plan for your Octopus database. So one of the things that I do is I run a report on it. So you can select reports, and then you can come in, select standard reports, and then select index physical statistics. What this is going to do now, it's going to go in, it's going to check the database, it's going to run some checks, again, say, what the defragmentation is. And here we go. So as you can see, I've got a few Octopus database up here. So I have actually picked the one that I use. And here we go, we've got some recommendations. If you extend out the partitions, you can get a bit more information. There we go, you can actually see that the data version has 50% defragmentation. So what I normally do is I create a maintenance plan. I am going to use the wizard, mostly because it's more user friendly for today's webinar. What I will do at the end of today's webinar is I will actually link you to a SQL script that you can use to actually run this. So I'm just going to create this, just calling the Octopus maintenance plan. So there we go. So there's a couple options here. In this instance, I am just going to select to run everything on a single task. I'm just going to run this weekly on a Sunday. The main reason I'm doing this is it's just to make things a little bit quicker. But what you can do is you can actually schedule all your different database maintenance tasks to run at different times, and that's generally what I would recommend. But here we go. So obviously I'm running it as a SQL Service account. There we go. So at this point, we've got a few options. We can select what types of maintenance tasks. I'm going to select the database integrity, because let's be honest, Chris, it's always a good idea to do, to check your database integrity.
Yes.
But what this basically does is it just performs an internal consistency checks and makes sure everything's working as expected. There's an option to shrink the database. I'm not a big fan of shrinking database, mostly because disks are so cheap, and also it comes up performance hit. Every time your database has to grow, it takes a small performance bit. So I generally don't shrink it. You can bet I am reorganizing my index. What this basically does is it defragments and compacts clustered and non-clustered indexes on tables and views. And then from there, I'm also then going to rebuild. The rebuild, the name, the clue is in the name, it's going to rebuild the index. And then lastly, the one, and this is the same database, one that I've been tasked, that I've been using for years and years, and generally it's not failed me. There's some options here as well. If you want to say clean up some history, you want to do some backups, that's fine. I'm going to skip past that. So the main thing here is all of these steps look fairly similar. You select the database, and then you select some options. In this instance, and for all of them, I'm just going to select all databases. So there we go. So select this. You've got some options. So when you're doing your integrity check, You can include indexes as well. You can also be it's just physical only. You want to do max degree of parallelism. You want to speed that up. That's definitely something to do. So, but in this instance, I'm just going to stick to the defaults. And for the most part, the defaults I find here, Chris, are very like they're common sense.
Mm-hmm. The defaults pretty much get you in a good starting point.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about doing it at like Sunday at 3 in the morning. Is there much of an performance impact when these things running?
There will be an impact. You generally don't want people writing to the database as you're doing it. But yeah, I mean, you could do it. But yeah, generally you don't want to be using the system.
Maybe if you deploy at 3 in the morning on Sundays to production, you might want to do these maintenance tasks at another time.
Yeah.
So that way you don't have like that database running and some conflicts there.
Yeah, definitely. And also with the reorganize, you can also optimize index only. For instance, you can actually, it may not need to run if the defragmentation is above, say, 15%. So it would only run. Same idea, when you're doing the rebuild, I'm selecting all databases. There's some options here. You can keep the index online if you wish. Generally, you want to do this offline. However, if you do, for instance, an approach people do take is an online rebuild daily and then an offline weekly or monthly. So that's something to factor in. In this instance, we are not going to keep it online, and we're only going to run it if the defragmentation, if the fragmentation is above 30%. And then lastly, the statistics job. This is something that is overlooked all the time. Statistics basically goes through, scans the database, and just makes sure that the stats are up to date. So sometimes what I see is people say, oh, it's a badly defragmented database. And really, when you go in, it's not. It's just people aren't updating the statistics. So please make sure you do, and where possible, do a full scan. Okay, so at this point, I'm then selecting the report. You can have it emailed. I'm just going to write it to disk. Select finish. Here we go. And then lastly, we're just going to run it. What this is then going to do is it's going to go through, it's going to update the indexes, it's going to rebuild them, it's going to update statistics, and then what you should find is that your defragmentation is down. So you can just right click and then select execute. At that point, I'm no longer going to be looking at that one. I'm just going to switch back to my presentation, because at that point what's happening now is in the background the defragmentation is happening, so that's great. What you'll also see as well is sometimes another tip that I give people is getting them to actually make sure that they're setting their retention policies. So the question, Chris, is what is a retention policy?
Yeah. So the retention policy is a good way to sort of manage your packages and make sure that you're not hammering your file system, your disk space. And you got some pretty cool tricks about the different ways you can scope retention policies, which is very cool for like defaults and then environment specific things.
Yeah, so with the lifecycle, it's the way you basically, with lifecycle, you control how your application goes through your environment. So like, for instance, if you say it has to go through dev, test, pre-production and production, that's great. But there's also some retention policies there. Retention policies can be configured at a day or per release. So obviously, select one that works best for you. So for instance, if you've got an application that is released every 2 years, then you probably want to think about using releases rather than days. So that's something to factor in. So in your life cycle, you have your default. So by default, it's generally 30 days. But if this is for cloud. So cloud has, we have recently increased cloud from 50 gig of storage up to 1 terabyte. So this isn't quite as important as it was, but what you can do is you can select to keep all, and that is the on-premise default. Generally, we've had a lot of internal discussions here, and one of the things is do we set a default? But the problem is if you set the default, I say 30 days, it may be longer than that before people realize you're actually deleting stuff out of Octopus. So what I would say is delete stuff. if you can, obviously have a sensible life cycle, which obviously, don't go through 100 environments, and don't keep all of your packaging releases for all of time. And one benefit of life cycle is what you can do is you can actually override your retention. So you could put, say, for instance, a default of 30 days for all environments, and then override it for development, for instance. So, say in development you wanted to keep something for 3 days, right? You have a really cut down version. Yeah, that's totally fine. You can come in, you can override it, and then change it. So, and one key thing is if a release is on a dashboard, so if when you load all this, it's on a dashboard, that never gets deleted. So that's something to consider. But definitely, if you've got lots of storage, if you've got lots of packages, use retention policies and life cycles to clean up your releases. Because one of the things that does really hurt is, when you don't clean things up. And Octopus is quite chatty with the database. So what you, if you're constantly adding releases onto project, then that's definitely something to consider. Okay, so at that point, it's over to you.
All right. So one of the problems I see a lot of is lots of environments. And here we have an example of the configuration that I've seen where we have a development. When they come in, the first thing they always add is development. They never need a development environment, right? The next thing they do is add one of the developer machines. And in the name, it says machine, which makes you deployment target, not environment. And as we keep going down this list, we see a lot of redundancy and a lot of overlap and things that don't really is an environment. Is there a rule of thumb of how many environments you typically recommend for, Derek?
It's something we chat about quite a lot internally. But generally, I'm looking, if you've got less than 5 environments, I'm wondering what you're doing, because 5's a good number. It just feels like dev, test, pre-prod, staging, UAT, production, that kind of falls around 5. And then if you've got more than 10, I'm definitely looking. To be honest, Chris, I've seen people with thousands of environments. I've seen some customers have actually. There was one customer who had something like 3,000 environments.
Wow.
And had something like 200 deployment targets. It's like that it should be the other way around,
Yes. So yeah, so like an environment is like a logical collection of deployment targets, and so these deployment targets define what type of infrastructure you need to run your product, and you should be able to more or less replicate that collection of deployment targets in multiple environments. Whereas dev has a VM and maybe a web app and maybe a database, and then stage and production, they should all have similar type infrastructure and deployment targets. The difference between them is sort of like scoping and permissions, as who can go and deploy into those environments. Way to separate like releases, because Octopus did a good job of telling you what version of your product is in what environment, so you know at a quick glance what's in production, what's currently being tested, and you can see that in a properly set up environment. Whereas here it might be hard to see. And so let's take a quick look at how what this would look like in a better configuration. So we'll pop over to this space over here, and you can see I have these 5 environments we typically advocate for. We have dev, QA, stage, UAT, and production. And at a glance, you can see what version is in each environment. But how do we go from all those environments into these 5? And what we did was we leveraged one of the amazing things that has is called tenants. As you can see, you see something familiar. You see Bob's machine and Chris's machine. You also see the different regions, and these are all tenants. And you have a webinar coming up in a few weeks that goes more in depth about tenants and the true power of tenants. But this is something we wanted to touch on because this is a good way to go from lots of environments into a few environments, but very quickly set up. And you can see what versions in these environments is if you go into the projects and click onto the project they're linked to, you can see what version is in what what tenants, and coincidentally, what region is how we have these set up. So you can see in our production for all of these tenants, it's version 1. But in our stage, we have version 2, and we got version 3 being tested on. And looks like we have a developer who's working on version 4. We can just see that at a quick glance.
I
And
absolutely love multi-tenancy, Chris. I
it,
think it's got so many. It's so powerful, and it does so many things.
it
Like this,
does.
like that. See how you've quickly, traditionally, like when you were looking at that first one, the bad version. When you look at that, it's something I see a lot of. Lots of different environments. Different requirements. Dev 1, Dev 2, Dev A, Dev B, Test 3. You see so many weird and wonderful configurations, and this is the benefit of tenancy. You can take those weird and wonderful and convert them to tenants.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and the main thing I love about multi-tenancy is not only not only does it solve things like environments, but also as well solves when you've got thousands of projects as well. Because one of the things that I see is, product X, say someone has a product X, and then it is applied to customer Y. And then that's normally, in the project, and then you've got 50 of those because customer X is also customer A, B, C, D, E, and that's where multi-tenancy really does help you scale your usage of Octopus.
It does. And so for going off that example, is I've have clients who we have a main product that has their main database deploy and their website stuff and um, some functions that go and do things, right? And that's their main product that the customer use daily. They also offer enterprise insights, which allows them to do cloud hosting for their clients to be able to look more into their data and how they're using stuff. And so instead of having some initial thoughts, maybe to have a say Coca-Cola um, tenant and then a Coca-Cola EI tenant, but you don't have to do that with tenants, right? Octopus does something amazing where it allows for reusability, where in the same area, you can go in and you can connect to a second project, right? And so it's the same tenants, and it's just being added to another project, and it has variables for that project specifically. And you can share, like, the database is going to be the same between the two, the source database, and so you can just define that once. And if that database ever changes, say that tenant that customer needs to migrate to another database, whether it be to another platform, cloud provider, or what have you, you can just update the database variable in one spot, and it's amazing. Just makes it so much easier to maintain and manage. Another thing about tenants is they can be scoped to environments, right? So once we shrink down all those environments, we can go and then make it easier to scope tenants to environment, because we got Chris's machine. That's never going to be a production. That tenant's never going to be in production, right? It doesn't make sense, and it's a security thing if we do that, right? More or less getting some features into production before it's ready. So if you can scope it to dev, and then when you go to deploy, this tenant and the things that are meant for this will never be in production. It's sandboxed a bit, and it makes it so much ease of mind. It's part of that run with confidence thing that ClearMeasure really loves, and that's why we like Octopus so much. Is it helps you have confidence that it's not going to mess up.
Yeah, that I love this because it does. It's very, it's almost like a tenant life cycle in a way. So for instance, Chris and Bob's machine, those are never going to make it into test because they're not testers. They're developers, for instance, right? You can put those in, and you can actually then make Bob's machine a multi-project tenant. It's definitely not the use case. It's more
Yeah.
tenants is generally something that you can do to cut down, and simplify things. And you do see, you see a lot of people using it as regions, as SaaS. Obviously you see
Hmm.
a lot of software as a service people using it as well. But generally, if you're looking at your dashboard and it feels too busy, look at multi-tenancy.
Yeah.
It really does scale things.
Yeah. So if you can imagine, if we click on the dashboard and we see a bunch of this, right? A bunch of products in the on the dashboard. We see a bunch of products in this product group, right? And there's not really releases here, but imagine, like, if all your products you could see at a glance what is where, and just that power alone for your management upper management the ability to just view the dashboard. Like they don't need permission to edit or change things, but if they have permissions to just view, they don't have to come ask you, hey, what's being tested right now? What version is where? And it just
Yeah.
it
And
cuts a lot of that over management. Go ahead.
the thing I like about it as well, so if you look in at production, it says 6 of 6. So you know, right, hey, 6 of 6 tenants who are eligible because you've told it in the tenant screen that it's, that it has production. If you then come in, you can actually see 6 of 6, so that then 6 tenants will all have the latest version as well.
All right, and you can see here that these are the tenants that got deployed.
Yeah.
Right. So if you needed specific logs for a certain one, you can see that.
Yeah, definitely.
But,
And it's funny, Chris, because what I also see, when you see lots of environments and you see people moving over as well, that's the thing. What I also see is hundreds of people using in a single space, hundreds or even thousands of projects.
oh yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I generally find slow performing Octopus, it can be caused by too many environments because they've not been cleaned up because of retention policies, or and you've normally got hundreds of thousands of projects. So it is something that is correlated. When the more environments, the more projects, that's when your SQL is not having a good time. And then obviously if you add in a badly defragmented database, no one's having a good time. So a few common steps and you'll be on your way to success with Octopus.
Yeah, and I also noticed like one of the things that causes a lot of bad environments, or not bad environments, but a lot of environments, is a lot of projects as well, where a team will come in and like, oh, I have a new product, I need to create a new project for this new product, which makes sense, but then they don't want to mess up what's already going to production. They don't want to mess up what's already tested. They don't want to mess up other teams. So they'll do is they'll create their own project. Then they'll create their own environments, and they'll give it its own name. And that's sort of how it sort of grows out of control, right? It's just devs trying not to mess something up, inadvertently mess things up, right? And it's not a bad thing. But we need to like train ourselves to like know what's reusable. Like we need to as from the developer side, if we need to reuse a piece of code, we don't go and like create a whole new library and stuff like that. We go in, if we have a company has a shared library, we reuse that library. We don't rewrite print on write hosts for PowerShell stuff.
Yeah, it reminds me of dry. Don't repeat yourself.
Yes.
The common patterns I see when I see well used Octopus and well configured is it's give it a little bit of thought. Like for instance, adding development A may work for you today, but the problem is developer A in 3 months you're going to be wondering what is development A.
What is that environment? What's supposed to be in there?
That's it, and that's the thing that I see quite a lot. And what then happens is project X then becomes project A, B, C, D, because people then go in and reconfigure or don't know that there's already a deployment process, or they can't find it in between the other thousands. So no one's then having a good time as well.
So it's a problem that sort of builds upon itself. Whereas when you have this here, and you're looking for your project, like is there a project for, let's say you got switched to a new team, like where is the project at? Oh, maybe they haven't gotten there yet, so maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. Just create another project for the same project that already has 3 others because you can't find it in the list of thousands.
Yeah, and then someone as well is often then clone something that's been done before, and then they'll make the changes, and then just really, to be honest, I think the biggest thing that I see sometimes is just communication. It's generally communication problems. I find team A wants to do it one way, team B wants to do it another, so you'll land up with not really doing it anyway. So what I find is having like an Octopus champion in charge of things like environments, and there's a few ways that we can mitigate that risk, and you're going to be talking about them just now.
Yeah, so one of the biggest issues, not communication issues, Octopus can be a tool of communication, right? But if it's not good communication, then it's going to add confusion. And a good way to go from a lot of these projects is reorganize them and group them. If I click on the projects, I have this default project group that has 2,500 projects. I'm not going to find my project in there. This is bad communication. This is adding confusion and noise to the discussion. But if we take and just organize these into project groups, a simple change like that. If I have this project group for, like, say I have project product one. If I have product two here, it's named amazing website, and it has a bunch of things to go with it. I know I'm on that team, and I can know where to look. And I just had to look through 30 projects. So if I just load all of these on a single window, I can see if I need it or not, right? And just something simple like that can help with the communication issue that we were just talking about, like being able to find my project and do work on it. Another thing is just too many in general, right? If you have a project that hasn't been deployed since 2004, I'd recommend deleting it. Like if there's been no changes, no deployments, no nothing like that, I'd recommend just deleting it, cleaning it up, getting rid of all the extra noise and stuff in your Octopus instance will help immensely. Not only with speeding things up, because that's less for the database to load, but also just, again, removes from the clutter. And if you want to know what has been deployed to in so long, you can use Octopus's audit menu or audit view and find things that hasn't been done in a few years. And that'll let you know what hasn't been done. When was the last time something happened? And that gives you a good starting point. It might take a while to load that because it's going through so much data. Like you said, Octopus being so chatty. But once you get that, maybe that's something you can run over the weekend. And once you get it, this will give you a good starting point of where to start cleaning things up at. Another thing is if you have a lot of security concerns where you don't want team A and team B sort of interacting with one another, you can use spaces. You can even see here in this demo, we have spaces going between bad and good, and the projects are completely separate. The only thing that's shared between those two spaces is really the things in this configuration tab and your tasks, right? Where like you have some of the same configurations and stuff like that, but the users and the permissions can be scoped to spaces, meaning that Bob and Chris, they can be on two different teams and then go to two different spaces. And then Bob can go into Chris's space and Chris can go into Bob's space, right? But I recommend spaces for a lot more projects and stuff like that, not just two individual developers. And if you want to like migrate to that, you can use an amazing tool that Derek absolutely loves is the project import exports, where you can export a project out of one space and import it into another space. You can also do that import exports into from cloud to on-prem or on-prem to cloud if you're doing a migration that way. I can attest from before this feature was implemented, having to be in communication with the Octopus Deploy support team for weeks, just getting the database back up and all the other backups and data that we needed to migrate from cloud to on-prem. And it was a hassle, not just myself, I'm sure on the support side, and I'm sure they are loving that feature.
It's funny. Yes, they do. I think that's the thing, that when we used to have that manual migration to cloud, no one really had a good time. I think that what you've said, Chris, there is it's really about logically grouping projects, together. So whether it's for instance, what I see is maybe it's .NET projects in a project group. Maybe the other one's PHP. Java, for instance. Whatever works, however you kind of build your teams internally is generally a good indicator. So like, for instance, you can put it into project groups. You can now separate it into different spaces. You can use the project export import to do space migrations, but you can also then, like you said, do it to cloud. You may migrate to cloud and realize, hey, wait a minute, I don't want cloud, and then you can then migrate the project back. So there's lots of different ways that you can do it, but really the big thing is plan it. Put in some logical separators between your projects, and please delete some stuff.
Yes.
I think that's the thing, and one of the things that you can do is almost everything is stored in the database for Octopus. So what you could do, it was a customer got in touch, like, we need to archive everything over 7 years old because we're a financial customer. And it was like, take a SQL backup, take that backup and store it for over 7 years, you're good. And the other thing is your packages. And one thing just to make you aware, when using project export import, your deployment targets and your packages don't come over. Anything at the file level generally struggles to come over, but the database. You can actually export a project out and then import it back in. It's really straightforward. You can, you've got a zip file, If you are moving to cloud, then definitely be on the latest and greatest version, because I think Project Export Import was only added in 2021.1, so it's fresh.
Right, it's still
Has
piping
only
hot.
just been doing it. Yes, but
Yeah.
you can definitely do it that way as well.
I'm a big supporter and advocate for cloud. What makes sense? I'm always like, make the tool work for you, don't work against the tool. So the database maintenance stuff you showed earlier, those things you don't have to do for a cloud. If you're on Octopus Cloud, Octopus takes care of that for you, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of benefits for being on cloud. Like you don't have to. You got your high availability, sort of like your Octopus isn't going to go down, right? That you don't have to maintain the infrastructure for Octopus deploy
Yeah.
stuff. But there are some caveats to that. There's some things you can't do on Octopus Cloud that you can do if you host it on yourself, which is something you're getting ready to go and look into, right? In a few
Yeah,
moments.
there's a few things, like from just at the front end, authentication providers, there's some slight differences there. For instance, you have to use Octopus ID, but with on-premise, you can also kind of tap into Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, etc. So that's just something to be aware of. But as well as that, I have a demo. It's almost like I planned it. So what I've got is there are a few key things just to consider between on-premise and cloud. Cloud comes just now with the default of 5 tasks. What's a task, right? Pretty much everything in Octopus is a task. So like for instance, if you come into tasks, so like deployment targets are tasks, you've got your retention policy, that's a task. Upgrading
Health
tentacles,
health
that's a
checks.
task. Yeah,
Yep.
everything is a task. So in this instance, this is for those in the UK, this is my Blue Peter moment. For those in the US, I prepared this earlier. So what you can do, there are ways. So when you launch a deployment process or a runbook, then that creates a task. So as you can see, I have 5 running. And one thing just to be aware of, I have switched to my local instance. So this is octo1.work.local. So what I've got is I've got a deployment process I kicked off before the webinar. And what I'm actually doing is these are just long running tasks. Let's have a quick look at what I'm actually doing here. So let's jump into Project 1. Project 1, they're all duplicates or copies of one another. So what I've just got is a long running task. Let's jump in. And all this is just a PowerShell sleep that stops for 6,000 seconds. So that's obviously quite a long time. So when you are configuring your Octopus deployment process, one thing is they generally happen consecutively. That's when things happen one after the other. In this instance, what I've done is I've configured it to run in parallel. That means steps 1 through 4 all run at the same time. The main benefit here is when you're using cloud, this also works on premise, but the main benefit with cloud is you've got 4 processes under your deployment task. So you can actually do that just by enabling running in parallel. Just be careful though, not everything can be run in parallel. For instance, if you're doing something where you have to deploy to a database first, obviously you can't do all of that in parallel. A runbook, for instance, if you're provisioning Azure infrastructure, you can't provision the SQL database before you do the SQL server, and then before that has to be the resource group. So just give that some thought, but you can definitely do parallelism here. Along with that as well, if you are doing it, workers is something that you can use as well. So workers is a way. Before, I think workers launched in around July 2018. Workers is somewhere you can run a task. So for instance, traditionally it would have either happened on the Octopus server, run a script to do something. That's what happens on the Octopus server, or alternatively, it happens on the deployment target. So the deployment target is, hey, transfer this package, install it on the IIS or SQL. So what you can do there is there are some tasks such as provisioning ARM templates, anything in the cloud you can do on a worker. So what you can do is provision your own worker. So for instance, you have a 5-node task. That doesn't mean if you add more workers, you get another 5 tasks. You still have 5, but the main difference is you've got a worker to run through your tasks a little bit faster. Because on cloud, workers on it are on everything. So anything that you run is actually on unless you're bringing your own workers, is all on either a Windows or an Ubuntu worker. And what you can do there is actually bring your own worker, say for instance more vCPUs, and the idea there is to get through more tasks with big servers running it, rather than you get X amount of tasks per worker. So that's something to do. But one thing just to factor in, and the next one is high availability. So let's have a little look. So as you can see in the task, we're running 5 long scripts. So let's jump into configuration, and this is something that you can only do on premise, and also if you only have permission to do so. So you come into nodes, and what you'll see there is on the left you've got Octo 1 and Octo 2. One is saying running and the other one is drained. Both have 5 tasks, and you see here node Octo 1 is you're allowed 5 tasks and you're running 5 tasks, and you'll see this is drained. Drained means you can't run anything but admin tasks on it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to disable the node drain. This would actually work as well. 5 tasks is normally quite short. So something just to factor in is you can actually, you can scale horizontally, which means adding more nodes, or vertically, which means adding more resources. So you may go down the route where you have a single Octopus instance, but just a really big one. I generally recommend using high availability here. So you've got 5 tasks. Let's jump over. We're going to select project number 6. We're going to redeploy to development, and now it should kick off. So it'll sit in the queue for just a moment, and there we go. So if you come over to nodes, there we go. Sorry, yeah. Well, it's just taking a moment, but yeah, what will happen here is there we go, the one task is running. What you can also do is you can just change the task cap. So say for instance, if you've got a big server that's on premise, then this is something that you can quite easily do. Generally base your task cap on the resources. So for instance, if you have something with 8 vCPU and lots of memory, you can, I've seen this up to 200 tasks. And I've actually seen this in up to a 16 node Octopus cluster. So it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah. And it's another thing is you can have the task cap set to like 100, right? But if you have like 10 workers running and none of your tasks are running on your Octopus server, then you could conceivably have that bump up to any number as long as you have workers to accommodate that change and you're not running things on the server itself.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is as well is be very careful with your task cap. If you over provision the task, so say for instance you put something with 2 vCPU and yet you try 100 tasks, the UI is going to be unusable.
Oh yes.
But as well as that, one thing just to consider as well is we actually have something is known as a UI only mode. So what you can do is you could actually have this in so that, say for instance, you have octopus.company.com. That could actually be 2 servers that are sat behind the load balancer. And you can actually just have the user interface being displayed behind that, and then have, say, the other nodes don't display the UI and aren't behind the load balancer. So they're kind of like worker nodes running workers as well. So again, there's something to consider there. But yeah. Definitely obviously think about, when your queue is becoming unusable, definitely think about running tasks and concurrent. Think about adding workers, particularly if you're using cloud. And if you are using on-premise, definitely high availability. We are looking to make our cloud product HA as well, and this is something we're hoping to release as well. So that with that, one last thing, we do actually have a page on our website. I will put this in. There's a few things just to consider. We've got some good starting points for this. So, for instance, if you are doing a POC, a small server, 2 cores, 4 gig of RAM, generally never combine your Octopus server and the database server. I don't like SQL Express, but you can use it. But yeah, as you go, so there is no kind of fine number. It just really depends on things like how many certificates are you renewing, how many deployment processes. But there is definitely some bits here. And one last thing, check out this page by Ola Hallengren. I believe he's a Microsoft Data MVP. He is the gold standard when it comes to database maintenance, and I forgot to mention him earlier on. Definitely, if you're looking at that, Ola Hallengren is definitely something I use. If you have performance problems with Octopus, definitely check out this website. We do obviously talk about certain things like rebuilding all the indexes online versus offline. Also upgrading as well. A lot of this stuff works for upgrades, and you'll probably find that there's quite a few similar topics here we've been talking about today. Look at your task cap, look at that. If you have a slow deployment process, that is something that sits outside. We do have a separate performance site, and if you have a slow deployment process, it's generally not Octopus. It's normally network bandwidth or size of your packages. Like if you're deploying a 5 gig ISO, then yeah, it's going to be slow. So like that, just put some thought into it. Try and keep your deployment process nice and tight. Put things closer together. So if you're doing something in Azure, consider hosting Octopus in Azure. If you're doing stuff in AWS, same idea. GCP, yep. So there's lots of things to consider there, but generally it's just about reducing the load. It's get a faster internet pipe or move it to closer together. But yeah, if you are doing that, and if you do have any questions, obviously just reach out to us. We're always here to help you on advice@octopus.com.
So yeah, one thing about the task cap that your Octopus is doing, talking about making their product better, is they have an enterprise version where you can reach out and increase your task cap for Octopus Cloud users, right?
Yeah, this is something we've only just released actually, Chris. So yeah, if you do find if you're getting to that enterprise level with Octopus Cloud, it's not something we can do just now automatically, but it is definitely something that we can do manually for you. So we do have some customers which do have kind of 20 to 40 task caps. They have a much bigger pod or container than most, and obviously they need a bit more workers. But yeah, it's definitely something that we can support. And in general, our cloud product is just becoming a bit more enterprise ready. It's definitely a focus for us over the next while.
That's good to see.
Okay, well, unfortunately, that is the end of today's session. We are now going to be looking at some questions. So unfortunately, there doesn't appear to be lots of questions. We do still have time. One of the things I just want to say is I'm really sorry about the network issues earlier on. I'm going to start, Chris, with Ellen Atton's question. The database configuration is only for Octopus on-premise. Do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, sure. So Octopus database configurations, like we discussed earlier, towards the end of the presentation, was Octopus Cloud takes care of all the database maintenance for you. But if you have it on-prem, then you're responsible for the database maintenance and the configuration, that sort of thing. Where you have the ability for on-prem to do high availability database, which with read replications and stuff like that. But it is only for available for only on-prem. That's sort of the responsibility you take on and the power you're given by taking on that responsibility.
I would say that is absolutely perfect. But yeah, generally, the biggest tip I would say is talk to a database administrator. I am not a database administrator. I come from operations. I've done a lot of database administration, but it's just something to factor in. Please do maintain your database long term. Got a question from Hossein. Can Octopus measure the I/O speed or CPU speed during deployments on each deployment target and notify about the big change in them compared to previous deployments? Do you want me to take that one?
I do have some thoughts, and I'll let you jump in if I miss anything, because I'm pretty sure I might miss some stuff. So ways that I have helped clients solve this issue particular is Octopus doesn't have anything that I'm aware of built in to do that. But what we have done is metrics, some third-party metrics, and like application insights or new Redux for logs, that sort of thing, where we capture that information on the deployment targets and can compare that in a different way, and using those sorts of tools that's built and designed specifically for that. Did I miss anything, Derek? Am I
No, I
forgetting
think
something?
the only thing I'd probably say there is what you can do as part of your deployment process or your runbook. You can actually you can notify it. So, for instance, obviously, if you're doing something with application insights, you can generally tell application insights that's a deployment. And one thing we
Right.
do have coming up is reporting. We're going to be doing some bits around the metrics around the database side of things. So that is something that is coming up. But yeah, I think that's a really good question, Hussein. I think that's the thing, though. It's critical to understand what is happening on your deployment, whilst that's actually happening. So that's a really good question. One thing,
Yeah.
actually, one thing we do have is we do have a page. It's not this page, but we do have something. So if you do find that, if you do see that you have a slow deployment, we've got a page here which will take you through some things. So, like for instance, like I mentioned earlier on, if it's taking a long time, think about things like the network. Obviously outbound internet often is much slower than inbound, unless you're on a business line. So definitely, obviously, have a look at your deployment process. And this page will be available. I'll send this out as part of the recording. But yeah, basically, the smaller the package, the better. The smaller deployments, obviously, that's going to be a lot easier. But yeah, we do have that, and also we do also have that. So Hussein's given us some more context. The reason is we tried to find a slow deployment and realized it was a newly antivirus feature which was activated in VMware, causing disk operations to be slow. That is quite a tricky one. Yeah, I can understand why. But yeah, like that, see, to be honest, that does feel more like a support request. But yeah, generally, some things that you do need to factor in is antivirus, actually. It is something, you do see sometimes where if you're trying to do things with Octopus in certain folders and so forth, you may run. But yeah, that is something. What I will do, Hussein, is I'll take that back to the team and see if we can do something. If I'm being honest, it's unlikely to be included anytime soon. We've got a lot of really great features coming out later in the year, and everybody's very busy putting those out. Excellent, excellent. Oh, one thing, just Hussein, if you do, you can also reach out to us at advice@octopus.com as well, along with support. So yeah, we can definitely help you there.
Yeah, there's a
Right.
great community. There's a great Slack community. If you're not aware of where the entire Octopus community, as well as Octopus support, tries to help people answer questions they have quickly.
Just one thing there, Chris. Support do use Slack. It tends to be the solutions team that's more. So there's no SLA there. If
Right.
it's something that's really urgent, and it is, if it's how do I do X, it tends to be the solutions team. So if you can email advice@octopus.com. If it's something isn't quite right and you want some troubleshooting, then that would be support@octopus.com.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so well, unfortunately, I was hoping for more questions. But yeah, obviously, if you do have any questions in the future, you can reach out to us, both myself and Chris. You can reach Chris or ClearMeasure at info@clearmeasure.com. One thing just to be aware of, ClearMeasure are a US-based consultancy, and for the most part, do most of their business in Northern America. So if you do want to speak to them, just obviously factor that in. And then again, like I said earlier on, if you've got any support issues, please reach out to us at support@octopus.com. Any questions, how do I do X? It's definitely advice@octopus.com. If you do have some questions around your licensing, be it cloud or on premise, you can reach out to the sales team. And Chris, you're often found on. We actually chat fairly regularly on Slack as well.
Yes, I am on the Octopus Slack community. You'll see me there popping from time to time, asking questions or answering questions and that sort of thing. So
awesome. And you can join that on octopus.com/Slack. Please do put your questions into the advice channel. But yeah, excellent. Well, Unfortunately, as there's no more questions, we are going to wrap this up. So first, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Chris. That was really great. I really enjoyed the webinar. For those who attended, thank you so much again. We are running this session again in the US tomorrow and then in Asia Pacific on Monday. So please do feel free to share it with friends and colleagues. You can sign up for just the recording as well. We are back at the end of the month with better multi-tenancy with Octopus. And if you are interested in finding more about multi-tenancy, this is the webinar for you. This is going to be done by Mark Harrison and Adam Close, solution architects in our customer solutions team. There is actually a pause on webinars in August at Octopus. We are going to be getting everything prepared for the Config as Code launch in September. So join us on early September with myself, Michael Richardson, and CEO and founder Paul Stovall, where we talk about everything why Config as Code, and then we'll be doing a release webinar a bit later in the month. So thank you so much for joining, everyone. If you do have any questions, please do reach out to us. And failing that, enjoy the rest of your day.